In the book, you also mentioned that you sometimes imagine heroes and landscapes based on experiences from your personal life. When you design, to what extent do you rely on that personal image or impression, and to what extent do you think about the audience? That's a great question. I obviously wrote this book about reading, but I am, I should say, I'm a novelist now, but for 15 years I designed book covers, so this is something I've thought about a fair amount. But it's a great question because I don't think I've thought about it in quite such stark terms before. The answer is that I do not draw in as much as it's possible from my personal life at all when I'm working on covers. What I try to do when I'm doing a cover for a book is to find the most general form of say a character or a landscape, or it's one reason why I really dislike using photography on book covers. I mean, obviously a photograph will, I feel, give too much away. The reader needs to have that space to be able to imagine a setting and a character themselves. But also just the degree of specificity robs the novel of that magical power that fiction can have, nonfiction too. And my own life, if I was drawing on it, like I would be giving you my experiences, and I'm perfectly happy to write a book that will give you my experiences. In fact, I just finished a memoir. But with a cover, you're trying to appeal to, there's two vectors here. One is you're trying to appeal to as broad an audience as you can who's looking at the book for the first time, and you want them, as it were, to be able to see themselves in it. See is an interesting word because I designed all the covers for Franz Kafka in this country, and they all involve eyes, which I can get into, but it's kind of laborious and boring. But the point is that I didn't use my eye or someone else's eye. I drew an eye, and it's a very, very stylized eye, a kind of universal and general eye. I like to think that the affect and the emotion that the composition gives is one that would be fitting and in keeping with Kafka's form of writing, which is obviously strange and can be alienating, but also funny and vibrant and always weird. But yes, I try not to draw on my own personal experiences. Question number 4. What visual representation, film, picture, photograph, has ruined a description from a book for you forever? Boy. Most of my favorite books I've read in more than one edition, which is a good thing because, sometimes, bring it back to Nabokov for a second, Lolita is something I've written about a lot. There are a lot of depictions of Lolita on book covers. And one of the things I've always hated about those depictions is not just the fact that Lolita is in fact depicted on those book covers, but that she is depicted as far older in the photographs or illustrations than she is in the actual text, which strikes me as, well, it's annoying, again, to just have my image of this important character taken from me, shown to me. But more importantly, the book is about non-consensual sex between a child and a grown-up. And obviously when you see a picture of a child on the cover of Lolita, it's disturbing. And in fact, it's too disturbing for publishers to want to do it, which is why we end up with all of these 20-year-old Lolitas on covers. I would say that probably is a good example. Okay, next question. Are you a poetry reader, and how would you explain the specific differences shaping the way we perceive, visualize the language of poetry and poetic imagery? Let's see. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really thought about that before now. Yes, I'm a poetry reader. The differences. Poems as opposed to novels, there is a very intense density of meaning, line by line. A novel can take its time for something to unfold. Poetry, generally speaking, I guess unless you're talking about epic poetry, all the meaning is condensed. So there tends to be a lot going on, again, line by line, but even word by word, So I find that I probably spend more time reading a poem trying to unlock the various strata, the various layers of meaning in a line. I listen to the music of it. I think about what it's trying to say. Sometimes poems have very personal depictions of events, and in that case, for me, it's just like a novel. I do the same work, but often I will be more preoccupied in a poem with meaning that I would say is not optical meaning, but semantic meaning. Okay, next question. At the beginning of your book, you quote Wittgenstein. In one of his last works, Remarks on Color, he talks about colors as something that do not exist without language and that we use them only because we have language. What philosophical, psychological, and generally theoretical literature was interesting to you when it comes to dealing with the process of visualization and the phenomenology of reading? Okay, there's also a lot to talk about here. And that is an interesting thing that Wittgenstein is saying. I think, with Wittgenstein, it's very easy, I find, to draw a conclusion from what he writes that is not a technical conclusion. What I mean is that often in Wittgenstein's writing, he uses clear language to describe something that you may think has some sort of emotive meaning or cultural meaning or simple meaning, where in fact he's talking about something pretty technical. And I would say with a statement like that, he is being Wittgenstein very much so in his later works, in the sense that what he's trying to do is dispel philosophical problems by examining language very closely. So, a philosophical conundrum might be, well, do we all see the same red? When someone says red, are we thinking about the same color, that, the same sense data, the qualia that we experience when we look at a color? So I think with a quote like that, what he's trying to do is explain that the notion of color itself may be a symptom of grammar and syntax rather than a thing itself. And he has a lot of sort of gnomic utterances like this in his later works. It's one reason I love him. But the answer to the question is really there's so much philosophical and theoretical literature to draw on for a book like What We See When We Read. I tried to include as little as possible in the book itself because it is so technical. But, from Plato to the present, there's a philosophical literature about how the brain functions and what it is that we're experiencing when we experience something. And obviously the phenomenologists were very important here, Bergson and Merleau-Ponty, but also, structuralism, post-structuralism, all of it, Heidegger. And the scientific literature, which I'm not a scientist, I'm not smart enough, but my best friend is a neurologist, which is very, very useful.